why doesn't their government go back to gold? What is the threat of gold to the government or the central banks?
It's a competitor with a history. I mean, gold and silver were money long before Federal Reserve notes, thousands of years before. And it's a competitor. And I think there's something innate in humanity that we know that these precious metals are rare and they have value. I mean, that's why women wear gold and silver jewelry and India hoards it. I mean, it's it's in our psyche, it's in our blood, I guess. And governments like to control and monopolize money and credit along with the banks. And so they don't want any competition. That's why they had to push gold and silver out of the system, demonetize it, uh, talk against it. But we're in a catch-22 now. I mean, in a box, if you will.
Hey everybody, this is Rob Kientz with the Freedom Report, and I'm here with a roundtable first time in a long time. Those of you that watch my YouTube channel know we used to do this quite a bit. Well, we're bringing it back because I love this format. It's been a long time since I've done it, and since we're doing the show simulcast on Kinesis now as well, I thought this would be a great chance for both channels to see all of the guests. So we're going to start with Craig Hemke, who runs the TF Metals Report. Longtime fan of his, and he's had me on a show quite a bit, so we want to have him back on the channel. We also have Stuart Englert, who wrote the book Rigged, basically took a lot of the research that had already been done, added his own research to it, and talked about the gold manipulation story and put it into a format that everybody could participate in. So thank you for doing that, Stuart. And we also have Chris Hough, who's the program manager here for Kinesis, who has a long history as a silver stacker in the crypto space and his unique view on what's going on as well. Gentlemen, thank you for joining the roundtable.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to start off with a general question. We'll start with Craig. Craig, since I was recently on your program, a lot about what we talked about was the changes that we've seen in the gold and silver industry over the last 10 to 15 years. I know when I got involved, Craig, it was there were a couple of YouTube channels, there were some blogs or the usual sites that you would go to, and it very much was a niche sort of conversation that was going on back then about this space. And if you were in it, you're sort of the weird gold geek, right? Or the weird silver geek, if you will. And I loved it because it was just such a community of people that did it for the love of doing it. And now it's grown quite a bit, though. I think 5, 6 years after my journey on YouTube started, look at how many channels we have talking about. Look at how many people are getting involved. So I wanted to get your viewpoints, over the years. How have you seen things change in the gold space since you got started?
Well, anyway, Rob, thank you, first of all. And it's a pleasure to be here with Stuart and Chris. The, you know, you mentioned all the voices that are now prevalent. The internet just continues to grow. Our space that we occupy on, place like X continues to grow. Um, and there's a lot of opinions about, what drives price and how high price might go and that sort of thing. Um, and I guess I've kind of learned over the years, I used to really get involved in the day-to-day kind of stuff, the hourly trading and and the daily charts and all that stuff. And I guess, my opinion has kind of evolved over the year. I just want to kind of, with your mission, Rob, try to alert as many people as possible about what's going on to their currency and the endless just devaluation of the purchasing power of that currency. Because people, I'm just the, obviously, yeah, we're still kind of a niche area. 99% of the people out there that you might talk to have no idea. They might have, they heard of gold or silver in passing, but they don't realize that they are kind of standards of account and have been for millennia. The joke I like to, not a joke, but I guess the reference point I like to have is, the gold doesn't change. I always, here, I've got it right here again. This fake bar that I have, it's a piggy bank, right? So don't come to my house thinking you're going to walk out with a London bar. Um, but this is a good representation. I mean, these things in London are 400 ounces. And when Nixon closed the gold window and we went off the gold standard, it took about $14,000 to buy one of these. 25 years later, by the late 90s, it took a little over $100,000. And now at present, it's 1.2 million. So I mean, this hasn't changed. I mean, this thing's the same. I mean, the gold is just the gold. What's changed is how many dollars it takes to buy it. And so anyway, I'm glad that more and more people are becoming aware of it. I think the internet is a great way of spreading the gospel, so to speak, about sound money. But boy, we've sure all got a lot of work to do if we're going to alert as many people as we can.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even with all the efforts and all the things that have gone on, we're still in the minority, and that's the efforts that we're putting out there is try to educate people on that. Stuart, I know you've been a big part of that education with the book and everything. Since you've done the book, how's your journey been in the space, and how are you being received? Are people reading the book? How's that being distributed? And do you think more people are understanding the truth about the monetary system now than before?
Well, I've just been amazed how much has transpired in the last 6 years since I wrote and published Rigged. At the time I published it, I had a lot of naysayers, even people in the industry telling me, it's a myth or it's conspiracy theory or whatever that the metals were manipulated. I had a coin dealer said, well, if the metals were manipulated, the price would be manipulated higher. And another person, dealer, told me, well, I've never known anybody that sold an ounce of gold by telling the buyers that the price is manipulated. So, but I think there's been a lot of education that's gone on in the last 6 years. And it's due to Gatta's work. It's due to, like you say, all these podcasts in the metal space now. And I think my book has had a small, role in that as well. Um, it's not a bestseller. It's a niche book, but it's easy to read, and it has sold copies uh, not only in the United States but in 12 foreign countries, which just I never envisioned that when I wrote the book. So there's been a lot of education. It's still at the very small grassroots level, but the fact that we see this sound money movement at the state level, I think, uh, is a result of a lot of the work done by gold and silver proponents over the last couple of years.
What's your view on that, Chris, coming from your space? I know you've been a silver stacker, you've been involved in crypto projects. What was it for you that you got involved in this industry? Was it stuff like this? Was it reading books like this, or how'd you get involved?
I just think that anyone paying attention realizes they can tell us inflation is X and everything's going to be okay. But I think most people realize their paycheck is not covering their bills, and it was a few short years ago. And so it's people understand simple math. My paycheck is the same. Why don't I have any money left over? Inflation is not exactly what they say it is. And then they see things like the price of gold and the price of silver exploding higher at times, and certainly Bitcoin and the cryptos. And I have lots of opinions on that. But I think it's interesting to point out what Craig said about the price of a 400-ounce bar of gold. I think it's fascinating to me that the talking heads on TV tell us about how well you're doing in the NASDAQ, and you'd be up 40%, whatever the current number is. But the truth of the matter is, I don't know the numbers right off the top of my head, but gold was only $300 an ounce in the early 2000s. So you can sit in the NASDAQ all you want and be excited about being up, whatever, one times or 100% or whatever. But gold went from $300 to $3,000 in the same time. And they won't talk about that because it doesn't fit the narrative and it's not good for the stock market. And I think there currently is a capital rotation event underway, which they are desperately trying to stop. out of the stock market into things like gold, silver, and Bitcoin. So I think they have a real problem on their hands.
Yeah, they do. And that fast forward to today. Thank you guys for introducing kind of like your stories and what got you involved. Fast forward today, we have the current administration doing a Bitcoin reserve, a gold reserve, but it's ostensibly more to hold up the existing system. It's not like we're going to switch over and all of a sudden gold's going to be money. Um, it doesn't seem like the current administration really, for all of the promises that were made, understands what truly sound money is, and it seems like they're still trying to hold up the existing system. And isn't that what politicians always do? Was that predictable? What are your guys' views on that? I have my view working on the state level to pass all this legislation, but what's your views on that? Do you think the government truly sees the problem? And if they do, are the methods that they're choosing really effective? I'll leave that open for anybody who wants to answer.
I mean, if you want me to start off, it's not that they don't see that gold is money. What was it? Ben Bernanke, when he was being interviewed on Capitol Hill, said that we just held it out of tradition. They know they don't hold gold out of tradition. They know gold is money. This is why the central banks hold it. So to think that the current administration or any government doesn't understand the problem, it's I think we all know Greg Hunter on this show, but he always says it's too stupid to be stupid. And that's exactly what that is. They know that gold is money. They don't want us to know gold is money. So that's my opinion.
And why do you suppose that is? What is the threat of gold? Stuart, we'll start with you. What's the threat in your research for the book? What's really the threat of gold to the system, and why won't they support it? Why won't we just switch back? I mean, it's obvious the current system has its issues. People are dumping the dollar. We've got massive trade issues. The whole world's realigning. You see the hot war starting. We're in a period of time with a lot of change. If one of the solutions is economics, because it is, because we're having trade wars, why doesn't their government go back to gold? What is the threat of gold to the government or the central banks?
It's a competitor with a history. I mean, gold and silver were money long before Federal Reserve notes, thousands of years before. And it's a competitor. And I think there's something innate in humanity that we know that these precious metals are rare and they have value. I mean, that's why women wear gold and silver jewelry and India hoards it. I mean, it's it's in our psyche, it's in our blood, I guess. And governments like to control and monopolize money and credit along with the banks. And so they don't want any competition. That's why they had to push gold and silver out of the system, demonetize it, uh, talk against it. But we're in a catch-22 now. I mean, in a box, if you will. The government is trying to get uh, people, investors, to buy their bonds, right? But that's why they have to keep interest rates high. And Trump, on the other hand, politically wants them lowered to juice the economy. So these two things don't work together. And that's why there's a battle going on between the Fed and Trump right now. Uh, which way will that end up? The Fed's trying to protect the dollar, and Trump's trying to increase exports. And those two things just don't work together. Robert Triffin, I don't know if you remember his dilemma or paradox. He predicted this back in the 60s that, trying to maintain the US dollar as a global currency while stimulating the domestic economy are in complete conflict. And that's why gold and silver prices had to be suppressed by the central bank, Western central banks, and the US government.
I mentioned Robert Triffin on my daily podcast yesterday, Stuart. It's funny. I was going to say that again. I actually then, as I was going through it for all the people on my site, I called it the Connolly conundrum. Would be the same thing, because then Connolly, is famous for John Connolly, who was the Secretary of the Treasury,
Right.
for saying, it's our currency, but it's your problem.
Yes.
And I don't, again, I mean, how do I know the motives in their hearts? As for the politicians, I think it's twofold. One, they want to stay in power. I mean, I think we all know, we've all seen the charts, these politicians that, come to Washington with net worths similar to all of ours. And
Right.
after 6 or 8 years, they've got $50 million, and all that stuff. And so they know they want to stay in power. And you do that by government largesse and handouts, and that sort of thing. So they got that going for them. And I think too, I mean, they're not, I mean, okay, some of them aren't very smart, but most of them are smart enough to know that as Lynn Alden famously says, there's no stopping this train.
Right.
I mean, and again, it gets back to the Triffin dilemma. If the U.S. government were to suddenly demand, if there was some kind of law, if the politicians said, okay, we're going to cut bare bones and we're going to go from our current $2 trillion annual deficit, which is what it remains, and we're going to go back to zero. We're going to balance the budget, which sounds good, and gets the masses. Yeah, red team, yay, blue team. If they were to, it would be such a global deflationary event because the world needs dollars.
The economy would implode.
Right. So they know that they can't stop it. And even Trump has changed his messaging. He came into office, we're going to doge this and going to cut all this spending. And I remember initially it was going to be like $1 trillion in spending they were going to cut, and it ends up being like 150 billion or whatever it ended up being by the time they were done. He has and his team have even changed their message now from cutting back the spending to we're going to grow out of it. We're going to make our economy so strong
And how
that
many times have we heard that before?
right,
You
right.
know,
But that's kind of a recognition on their part that again, there's no stopping the train, and
they
and
can't
so and the
stop it.
train
They
is
can't stop spending,
yep,
or the whole economy will collapse.
yep,
I unfortunately want to take it a step further. There are some horrifying graphs of the mirror of the money supply growth and the population growth. There are some big problems on a personal level with humanity if we slow the growth of money creation, because you can make a pretty fair estimate that that's going to slow the growth of the human population and probably reverse it. So there's a lot at stake
yeah.
if you decide to. You can't balance the budget. I mean, you can say you can, but I don't think you actually can. Things will break, and it will break all over the place in a catastrophic fashion, in my opinion.
And that there's this whenever the idea of a gold standard or a gold backing comes up, there's always people that say, "Oh, there's not enough gold to do that." No, there's plenty of friggin' gold. It's just not priced at the level that it would need to be. I mean, there's what the global gold supply grows by 1% a year. So there's more gold than there was the last time we had it 50 some odd years ago. It's just not priced at a level that you could then, translate it or back or whatever your
Remember
fiat
you
currency.
remember you have me here from Kinesis, and now gold is divisible by 10,000th of a gram on a digital scale.
That's
So
true too. Yep.
certainly there's enough gold when you start to fractionalize it on such
Yep.
a small margin. And shaving it off isn't practical, but certainly spending it in a digital form is. So yeah.
For sure.
So going back to that, I know you mentioned before the Doge thing. I found it interesting that it came out in the news that one of the Doge technical people came out and said, we thought that we were going to go in and see all this wasteful spending. And one of the reasons they didn't get into the trillions is like it wasn't that wasteful. It was all authorized. The problem was that they authorized the spending. It wasn't like they were spending $100 for a toilet seat everywhere, which I'm sure that happens. It was more that they're paying the right price for the toilet seat, but that nobody knows that they're buying this toilet seat, or they're buying 50 trillion toilet seats, or they're shipping the toilet seats to Africa to help kids or whatever. But it's all legally authorized. So they couldn't shut it all down.
Yeah.
And as I kind of warned when Trump came into office, I said he's the executive branch. He's one of three branches. If a lot of this has been authorized by law, then what you have is a corruption of the law that the president's not going to be able to solve by himself. And I think that we're kind of seeing this in the early Doge returns is they could only have done so much. And I think what I'm more concerned about is access to the data they got with the Treasury. It looks as though, and I don't want to accuse, but maybe they went outside bounds with the people that were accessing that to do the Doge stuff. And my concern more is Was that data compromised, and what is it being used for the right purposes? The data itself is tremendously valuable because of if you have access to all the transactional data around the dollar, that's incredible power in and of itself. It's almost like the data itself then becomes its own uh, asset. And so there are those kind of concerns. But it was predictable to me that you're not just going to come in and slash due to waste. I'm sure there's more waste they keep wring out of the system. It's that we voted all of this stuff in. We voted them in and they voted these policies. And it's going to take the government changing itself. And will the government actually do that? And is that possible? Or is it more up to citizens like you and me to say, hey, this is the change we want to see? And that kind of goes into the C4SM stuff where we're doing gold legal tender. So, but there are no super easy answers. It's not just you push a button, even if you wanted to, even if mathematically you could do it without crashing the economy. You have to deal with the legal side of it as well. And if we're authorizing all these payments and all of a sudden we just stop, you're going to have massive lawsuits come against the U.S. government because people depend on that. What about the hospitals and the people? Or what about the people in Africa? But once you promise these things, it's very difficult as a society just to back out on it. And maybe that's what we need to do. But think of all the people that would have had that promise. And that's the greater issue is the world is depending on this. How do we transition out of it without collapsing the system? And is that even possible? And traditionally, I would say no, because the math just doesn't math. So something has to happen. But I think now we're in the stage of we know it's going to break. The math's the math. What is the jumping off point? What is the path to getting there? What's the right way to handle this? Is it going into alternative assets, real world assets, gold and silver? So let's get into that discussion. Can gold and silver truly, save the system? I'll start with Stuart. Do you believe gold and silver can still save the system, even given the issues that we have? Is that possible?
I don't think the system will ever be perfect. Okay. Even if we get back to sound money, there's going to be people trying to get an edge, trying to manipulate. Part to go back on what you were talking about, Rod, part of maintaining the global dollar standard was disseminating dollars all over the world, handing it out. I mean, this goes back to the Marshall Plan after World War II, where the United States cranked up the printing presses after we got off the gold standard to hand it out all this money to Europe to rebuild. And that got them dollar dependent. And the same thing happened during the Great Depression with the states. The federal government started handing out its largesse, in the way of emergency aid and assistance to the states. And we still have that today in the form of federal government grants and revenue sharing. So the federal government has made foreign nations and states dependent on the dollar. But that system is breaking down now. And that's why we have the states, as you're well aware, looking at gold and silver to save them. Okay, they see gold and silver as a constitutional alternative. Some of them are actually reading their oaths of office that say they must uphold the Constitution. Well, a constitutional provision says that states can only make gold and silver legal tender. So this is all coming full circle. We abandoned the constitutional oath. We negated it. We violated it. And now people are going, well, this existing monetary system is not sustainable. We've got to look for alternatives. And isn't that what the BRICS are doing? So this is happening domestically with the states looking for alternatives to the dollar and dollar denominated debt, and the BRICS, the global south, if you will. They're looking for alternatives because they know we're in trouble. The financial trajectory of the United States is not sustainable, along with this mountain of global debt, which now is what, $320 trillion. There has to be a segue to a new system. Gold and silver have the history as sound money. And I don't think it'll ever be perfect, but we've got to move in that direction. I think we are moving in that direction. You think we're just being dragged there by the
It's just inevitable if you look at the math in the system that we're going to have to go that way one way. Either we're going kicking and screaming, or we're going to go there voluntarily, but we're going one way or the other.
We're going, and the powers that be that don't want to lose power and control
Mhm.
will try and get us onto these CBDCs, I think. And
Mhm.
there, I think, is going to be a battle. There's going to be uh, a financial, constitutional battle between the states and the federal government. Whether we go to these, are they going to be fiat CBDCs? Are they going to be partially backed? I mean, those are the big questions that are going to be answered here in the next couple of years.
I think something really dawned on me, and I don't ever think it's explained very well. But when we all go around saying the dollar is backed by nothing, there is an asterisk there, or there is a caveat there. We helped set up OPEC, the United States did. And what this means is when you had all the major oil producing nations agree to only accept dollars in oil, then every country in the world needed to hold dollars in reserves to buy oil. Now, I'm going to give it away here. I do have a very large tinfoil hat, but it is no coincidence that every time we've invaded a country, it was shortly after they announced they were going to start selling oil in something other than dollars. So whether it's Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, even or now Russia, because they're selling oil outside of the dollar. And if that happens, that means countries no longer need the dollar in reserves, and they come flooding back home, and we would experience catastrophic hyperinflation. So there is something back in the dollar, and it's this oil trade or the petrodollar, if you want to call it that. But that's breaking down. That's the reality of the situation. So there's a lot of moving pieces to the dollar and why it's maintained its status and how we're still here. But yeah, gold is it goes back to gold being a problem for the status quo.
So I wanted to get into gold market and rigging and manipulation and talk about a lot on my channel. So we're gonna talk about it here as well. And I'd be remiss, Stuart, if I didn't ask you about this, since a lot of your research in your book was about that. Um, why is gold one of the most manipulated assets? And we'll get to Craig in a minute on this because he talks about it too. Why do you suppose, Stuart? What is the motivation behind price manipulation, long-term price manipulation exist in the gold market? What is the interest? Is it just to make money on the trade, the derivative markets, or is there another reason behind it? What did you find in your research? Why do you suppose that gold is that they're so interested in managing that price, gold and silver both?
Well, banks and governments have a symbiotic relationship, okay? They scratch each other's backs. And this has been going on for centuries. Um, the banks lend money to the government, all right? This started back in Europe and the Bank of England. And when they lend money to the governments become dependent on them. Well, the banks want to control credit and the money supply, right? And so they can't always control gold and the price of gold, but they try. They try to do that. But you know what? I think silver is the most manipulated currency, monetary metal, industrial metal. I mean, if you look at this year alone, gold is up what 40% year over year. Silver is less than half of that. Okay. So I think the paper manipulators are suppressing silver much more than they are gold. And who's buying the gold? The central banks are buying the gold. Okay. Who's buying silver? Industry and common man. You know, I'm a silver bug. I'm not a gold bug. I prefer silver. I think silver should be money again, you know. Uh, I'm a silverite, if you know what that term is, you know. The gold bugs were initially the bankers. I don't know if you knew this. It goes back to the 1800s. The gold bugs were the bankers. They wanted to control all the gold. Okay. Who were the silverites? They were common men. They were farmers. They were miners. They were, regular people that wanted a silver standard. Uh, and I think silver is the biggest threat to the banks. Imagine silver going to $300, $400, $500 an ounce. And these bullion banks not being able to cover their shorts. It would blow up the whole system.
That's a
I don't
good
know if
point.
that answered your question. I hope it did.
Yeah, it does, Craig. What's your view on that? What's the role in silver in this, and why do you suppose there's so much control going on of the gold and silver markets? And we're talking about in terms of pricing and the derivative markets. For those that may not know, I know people watch the channel probably know, but those that may not know, the prices are determined in the derivative trade, not physical at your local coin dealer. So that trade's a national market. There apparently has been a lot of manipulation over the years. I've talked about it ad nauseum on my channel. What's your view on that, Craig? On the manipulation piece of it, what's the motivation there and who's doing it?
Well, on the gold side, excuse me, people look at you funny and they, what do you mean it's manipulated? Well, what isn't really? Currency markets are manipulated, whether overtly or covertly, right? With a peg to one currency to the other, or covertly just by jawboning, we'd like a weaker dollar, a weaker yen, or whatever, right? What is quantitative easing or the eventual policy of yield curve control if that isn't manipulation of the bond market, right? I mean, and so the idea that, well, but no, but this trading of derivatives in the gold market, no, nah, man, that's free, natural, organic stuff. Um, it's like, and it's part of the bigger puzzle. If you're going to finance this debt and keep this game going as long as possible, you need as low as interest rates as possible. Well, how are you going to convince everybody that, to buy a U.S. Treasury, a 10-year note at 4%? Well, you got to convince them that inflation is actually only 2 or 2.5. And as such, you remember like Greenspan going up in front of Congress and adjusting the cost of living adjustments back in the 90s. There are all these different things to control what is perceived to be the inflation or control what's perceived to be the economic growth with the GDP data. All of that stuff is manipulated. Hell, I could go on. How about the jobs report last weekend before the 4th of July? They told you it was 143,000 new jobs. It's a sign it's this big, robust job market. Look how strong it is. Of the 143,000, 73,000 was the annual seasonal adjustment of teachers taking part-time jobs in the summer. So Mrs. Johnson, who teaches second grade at Shade Tree Elementary, decides, well, she's going to make a couple bucks working at the local Hallmark store in July and August. And that's half of the number that was supposedly so strong. But again, so the idea that, well, what are you talking about, gold? Everything is manipulation and perception management. That's the old Jim Sinclair term, management of perceptions, economics, MOPE. Anyways, as it goes to silver, and I think now in gold as well, the banks, the bullion banks, which operate the physical end of the market in London, and then they trade the derivatives in New York. And as Rob says, the primary pricing scheme is through the derivatives. They have this kind of heavy hand to manage price really on a daily basis. They try to flow metal into that price to keep it legitimate, if you will. Even one of the more recent convictions for manipulating the prices, Michael Nowak, who was a one-time head of trading for JP Morgan precious metals desk. He was the head of their trading, but he was also on the board of the LBMA in London. Okay, so think of hand in glove kind of stuff. That continues in gold. It's a managed retreat. It's kind of gotten away from him here in the last 12 or 18 months. But it clearly is in silver. The banks dig a hole. Most of us know, when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. But what the banks that manage that little tiny silver market do is they just keep laying on the shorts. They keep supplying new contracts, taking the short side and feeding them to the speculators on the long side in the hope that eventually the amount of entities that are going to actually play on the long side get tired, momentum runs out, and then they can flush them back out. And in time, and we saw it for however many, 11, 12 years, prices mainly just going sideways. It's like the old adage, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Well, actually, it'd be 1 out of 3. We don't make money. Nobody else makes money, but the banks make money. And so 1 out of 3 ain't bad. And that's what they do. They make money on that sideways. Or they can even manage an 8 or 10% gain. Silver is Yeah, I think to some extent their Achilles heel. I'm sorry I'm running long on this answer, but um, we'll see if you get into a spot here in the coming months where they are forced to cover shorts. That was the last month in 2011, April 2011, when price went from 38 to 48 in about 4 weeks. That was a commercial short squeeze, was in the CFTC data. You could see it. Wasn't, speculative rush. It was a short squeeze. That's possible to have happen again. If it ever does get out of hand, I don't know if it's a big, billion trillion dollar um, systemic risk type thing because COMEX has done this before. In the markets, the CME, they'll just close it. They'll just say, you know what, we're just going to wrap this up. We'll price everybody out at yesterday's close, and that'll be that. I think they do that before the losses really got into the billions and billions and pushing trillions. But anyway, again, that's probably get me started, Rob. And I've been drinking coffee all morning, and I'll go on and on about this. But
I threw
in
one
the end,
right down the middle for you, Craig.
yeah, no doubt. That's even more like T-ball, Rob. Anyway, in the end, um, there are motives for people to say that it's not manipulated, right? We don't need to get into that but those people are out on Twitter and stuff as well. But again, all markets are for one reason or another. And to claim that somehow gold and silver are the only ones in the world that are these, pure as a driven snow, natural and organic pricing scheme. Give me a break.
So
Yeah, and I
I
wanted
just
to
like
toss
to,
in real quick just a piece of research to edify. You're talking about everything's manipulated. There's a lawyer out of Florida. Name is not coming top of mind, but I talk about him all the time. Who is a lawyer, also a professor, and has done a lot of research in commodities markets. Published author, peer reviewed, and he did a big report on manipulation in the commodities markets. And he said, when have they ever not been manipulated? Most of the regulation that exists today, the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the Commodities Act, all of that, all of the current law in the system is been based upon past manipulations. And further, when I interviewed the guy that was in charge of doing the investigations years ago into all these commodities, not just gold and silver, interviewed him at Silver Symposium, I guess 2 or 3 years now ago. And I put videos on my channel. If anybody wants to go see, go over there and you can see the 3 or 4 videos I did of the interview and my thoughts. They can't stop the manipulation if they want to. They don't have the personnel. Now they do have a system set up, but it's not being funded. And so the guys are supposed to be watching the traders. There aren't enough of them. The people are gone. They used to have like 80 some of these people, and they had like 12 when I interviewed him. And not only that, but the way the system is set up is it goes into these queues. So when you're doing an investigation and it goes 4 or 5 places and it's a black box and people aren't communicating, the investigation a lot of time falls apart. And so the way that the CFTC is set up to regulate that market is wholly ineffective from a controls perspective. I used to be an auditor. I know. I used to be a cybersecurity investigator. I know. I know how these are supposed to work. I did investigations for 20 years. And they cannot regulate this market. The CFTC exists. It's got a nice face to it. It's got a nice front. They do not have the resources, the time, the energy, the expertise left at that agency to regulate these markets, which allows the banks and the other market makers and all the other players to dictate the ultimate trade. And that's why you can see a chart that looks like it's been painted at certain times, and why it doesn't stop, which is something Craig's talked about ad nauseum, is because they can't stop it. They're not set up to stop it. And when I did my investigation of the investigators, I think there are good people that want to do good things, but they simply cannot. And that's the reality of it. So anybody that understands the history of manipulation of the commodities market and how the current government cannot regulate that, they're not set up to regulate it appropriately. They don't have the legislative authority, and even the authority they do have has not been funded, would understand why this is allowed to go on. It's not, see, a lot of times conspiracy theories or you just have an enabler and then people take advantage of it. And that's exactly what's happened. And you could say that that was designed that way. Maybe it was. But in reality, that's what's going on in the background. They don't have the capacity. Anyway, I know I'm going off on this for quite a bit,
Robert,
but it's important for people to understand that. Go ahead, Stuart.
do you think, well, I'm going to ask you a question now. If
Okay.
the regulators had the means to do it, do you think they would be allowed to enforce it? That's the big question I have.
Well, and see that we could really have a whole show on that if we wanted to. When Chris Marcus interviewed Bart Chilton essentially said, this is being manipulated, and he was the commissioner and he couldn't stop it.
Right.
So no, I think if you look at the legislation, it was Jerry Markham, by the way. Jerry Markham is the lawyer and the college professor. I believe it was at one of the Florida universities, FIU, I believe. You can go find that paper on the commodities markets and all of his research. But he pointed out how the legislation was created did not give the appropriate teeth. It's not just funding. They don't have the ability to shut these markets down. And what I also learned, when you dig into it and you realize how ridiculous it is, I was looking at, there was an announcement a couple of years of a cybersecurity incident at the COMEX, or well, essentially against the COMEX and against a lot of the players. And what was reported through just a normal press release, I'm sure they weren't even thinking about this when they put it in there. It was reported that they were waiting on data from the traders. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're the regulator. Why are you getting your data that you regulate the traders for from the traders? Isn't that the fox guarding the hen house? And in my inquiries, they were basically like, well, yeah, I mean, we don't have access to all these trading platforms. And I'm like, well, how the hell are you going to regulate? Like, how do you know the data you're getting is the original data? So we don't even know the investigators are getting all the right data. And that was put out public in a public statement by the CME Group and the CFTC. Well, the CFTC released it, but it was through their conversations with the groups running the markets. And
Right.
I could go on forever. It's not regulated the right way. No, it doesn't have the right teeth. Yes, we need legislation, and yes, this allows us to go on, and yes, you can see it, and it shouldn't be such a conspiracy theory anymore. There's enough whistleblowers come out, including former CFTC commissioners. Rostin Benham at a Boca V industry conference, and this is still on YouTube. You can still go watch it. Said a few years ago, we stopped the silver market at 30 bucks during silver squeeze because he was like, we had to protect the industry. And who is he protecting? Who are the players on the COMEX? It's the industrials and the banks and the merchants. And they need it. They need the silver for
Are
the
you talking about the tamp down?
tamp down, the famous, we tamped it down using all of our tools, including margin requirements and all that. They admitted on an industry event in public that anybody can watch. He was the acting commissioner, now the full-time commissioner, said,
Right.
yes, and he's the regulator. First of all, how does the regulator have any control over the market? You're not running it. You're I mean, so it's collusion between the regulator and the CME Group and the traders. And if that's being done for that purpose, why is it not being done 1,000 times a day? So to answer your question, legally and structurally, they're lacking. And the current group, and I'm not saying this for past commissioner, but the current commissioner is okay with manipulating to protect the players of the market. And obviously you have a government regulator and you have a private entity colluding to do this. So would they know?
You
And
answered my question.
yeah, and the
I
bigger
have a-
question is why, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
Why is it so threatening to them to have pure price discovery and an honest market in the metals? And does it go back to our earlier conversation? Is it about the industry and making sure we have enough silver to build rockets, bombs, and dental stuff? Or is it the bigger issue of it would truly, if the silver market blew up and took gold with it, wouldn't that expose the dollar? And doesn't that go back to the beginning part of our conversation? I'm going to leave it
It's
to you
all
guys.
of the
I don't want
it's
to
all
answer
of the above, I think, Robert. It's all of the above that you mentioned. It's
Yeah,
multifaceted.
I got a couple for you. First of all, Craig forgot to mention that half those jobs were teachers, but wait till the other half are revised lower in a couple weeks, and we find out, oh,
Right.
half were teacher and the other half didn't exist.
For sure. Right.
So that's coming. The second part that's really interesting, and Stuart, you're going to love this. Again, being over here at Kinesis, we can elect to get paid in any asset on platform. So I don't receive dollars for my work. I receive silver. So I'm taking this all the way to the point where I'm not dealing with this mess anymore. But let me formulate a why all this collusion is going on. And the answer is not nice. It's not a very nice answer. But what do wealthy people do? They buy low. So why suppress the price of an asset so you can buy it low? Now, why won't they let it take off? They'll let it take off once they have it all and the rest of us plebes have none. I think that in therein lies your answer to why. I think it's massive amounts of greed. And I think if you don't hold any gold and silver, when they let the price go to the high end, you're going to be in a lot of trouble because we're going to have dollars that are worthless and they're going to have gold and silver that's worth untold fortunes. Craig, I see you shaking your head. I guess you
Oh, yeah,
feel
that's and at the end of the day, that's what the last 15 minutes of this has been about because people might have been watching us going, why the heck do I want to invest in something like, well, you need to use this to your advantage. Because when this, I mean, it's foundation of this pricing scheme is built upon fraud and deception and lies. Well, it's not anything built upon fraud, deception, and lies isn't going to last forever. And when it crumbles, and we see, there's 1 ounce for every 100 ounces of, digital pretend metal that trades in the derivative markets. When that fails, well, all these prices, as they convert to dollars or yen or euro or whatever, are going to be remarkably, considerably higher than they are now. So, in a sense, this is good for everybody that there is still time. And I'm talking to everybody listening, to regular people that are watching us and listening to us. There is still time for them to do what Chris just described, taking your dollar reserves and putting them into sound money. Oh, we mentioned, I think Stuart mentioned the central bank demand earlier. And that's obviously underpinning the gold price at this part. Part of why gold's up 50 or 60% in the last 18 months is there's this relentless demand for physical metal that's draining that system that I mentioned.
15 consecutive years of central bank net purchases.
They're
That says a
cooking.
lot.
And what are they
Yeah.
doing? A central bank has foreign currency reserves, right, from all of these dollars that the world trades in. Okay, so you and I, all four of us, have dollar reserves that are our leftover from, we earn money, we spend money, and what's left is your savings. It's the same thing. It's our own reserves. Well, if these global central banks, of the global south and whatever, are taking their dollars a little bit at a time and converting it back into physical metal sound money, well, then heck, why wouldn't everybody watching us to be doing the same? I mean, take some of your own dollar reserves, got to get it out of the system. Don't just like buy the GLD, put it in Kinesis. Get it, you buy it from Kinesis, take it out and just put it on your own, under your own cellar or whatever. But that's where you can use this manipulation, to your advantage. Like Chris said, others, if the wealthy and the banks and the politicians are using this to accumulate the metal while they can to leave everybody else as paupers. Well, play along with them. Uh, swap
they're going
out
to
your
sell
own
high,
dollar
right?
reserves for some gold and
They're,
silver.
they're going to sell high. How do you know when the price is high? When the central banks start selling it. That's how you know when the price
They're
is
not doing
high.
that yet. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great roundtable. We're going to end it here for a couple of reasons. We've been going for a while, and I could sit here and talk to you guys all day long. This has been great. Hopefully, we get to come back and do it again if you guys are amenable. But I'm also been told by my assistant I'm missing another work meeting, so I've got to jump
Oops.
off
You
and
gotta
go take care of my regular job. But I want to end it up with just a thought from you guys. So my thought is this: I think we're entering this period, and I'll edify a lot of what you guys said of changing the monetary system, and we're trying to fight, through Kinesis C47, my associations, and what I do every day on the Freedom Report. We're trying to fight for honest money, and we're doing it at the grassroots and state level. And I agree with you, Englert. There's going to be this battle between the feds and the states, and that's inevitable. I called this 2 years ago. I said, with all that we're doing, but this is where we need to go. And it's interesting to me that the citizens of this country are waking up and saying we're taking this battle to our states and to our governments to say, we need a solution. We see what's coming. You're not getting the job done. Let's have a conversation. And I'll be really interested to see when the time comes, how do they at the federal level address this? Do they address this with an open dialogue, or they address it with, we're going to enact capital controls and go down that route, and confirming what we think and been saying for a long time on my channel, at least, it's going to go down the way it's always gone down. They're going to have to hyperinflate. I think that's where it's going. But we're forcing that discussion. We're doing what we can at the citizen level to say we need to have this discussion. And we're trying to set up alternative systems that allow people at least a choice to save people, because we know a transition is coming. And transitions can be painful for the common man. And so at least, we're trying to do that. But the thought that I want to leave with everybody here, or what I want you to comment on in your own way, is where do you think we're going, the good and the bad, and how can people protect themselves, and what can they do? So I'll start with you, Craig. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the dollar has only been the world's reserve currency since 1944, right? We assumed that mantle from the British pound, and you can go back in history. I mean, it's a transitory, whatever it is, feature that governments get to have. Somebody else is going to want it before too long. Maybe the Chinese, I mean, you name it. The torch will be passed. It's usually not passed peacefully, unfortunately. So I think we got to prepare for that. The thing I just guess I would close with is price. We've had a really good rally in both gold and silver over the last 18 months. There's a lot of people trying out there, oh, it's expensive and it could do for a pullback. I don't know. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? However, as I said earlier, if you believe and you understand the math, that it's just going to take more and more debt, more and more dollar creation to feed the beast, then that just means that, just going to take more and more dollars to buy these, right? And so, yeah, okay, whatever, $3,300 for an ounce now, but the train isn't stopping. It may go up and down in the short term, but it's going to 4,000 and then it's going to 5,000 because of that math. So I'll just kind of leave it there. Just don't get scared away by price.
Stuart, I'll throw you up next. What's your thoughts? Where do you think we're headed, and what can people do about it?
Well, one of the things that gold and silver proponents and stackers can do is to remain vigilant as we're going through this transition. The states are making a move toward sound money. It's incremental, it's gradual. You're at the forefront of that. I think that gold and silver proponents have to remain vigilant as this process is happening. As these rules and laws are being implemented, we have to remain vigilant about how these systems are set up, which allow gold and silver to be legal tender. And one way to do that is to track what's happening with your organization, Citizens for Sound Money, and the Sound Money Defense League. And you mentioned there are other grassroots organizations around the country. Track what's happening. Know what's happening so that you can contact your lawmakers if they're heading in the wrong direction on this. Whether these metals, if and when these metals become legal tender, there's a question about how they will be used in electronic transactions. Will it be blockchain? Will it be digital units? Will those units be redeemable for physical metal? That, to me, is a major question. And if it's not, we're just back to another fiat system, if you will, an unsound system. So to me, as we're going through this transition, gold and silver proponents and stackers have to be vigilant, influential, and follow what's going on and influence it.
I think that's a great segue for me. So anybody listening not familiar with Kinesis, what you're describing, Stuart, is already here. Our metals are fully redeemable, and it's based on the blockchain. So these things already exist, and certainly we have some competitors spinning up, but that's kind of neither here nor there. But I think that you're spot on. If you're buying a representation of gold and silver, whether that's paper, whether that's ETF, whether that's a digital form, if it's not fully redeemable, stay the heck away from it. Read the paperwork, read the contracts. Is it referral? Is it redeemable in gold and silver? Unless they want to give you dollars for it. I mean, that's a big problem. You go to redeem and they say, oh, well, we don't actually have the physical. We're going to give you the equivalent in dollars. Well, you're right back where you started. So yeah, you need to pay attention to that. As far as where we're going, I think one of my favorite stats, and Craig, I like how you just use math. That's what I like to use too. We all know that the old all-time high of silver is $51, $52 back in 1979, 80, somewhere in there. But when we say, oh, silver is approaching a new all-time high, not when you adjust for inflation. This is the piece that people are missing. If you adjust for inflation, silver has to be $640 something today to break the old all-time high of the 1980s or whatever it is. So that's just math. at some point, silver is going to adjust for inflation, and those are the kinds of numbers and where I think we're headed. And I agree with you, Stuart. It's well underpriced compared to gold. I mean, the gold silver ratio says so. The industrial demand says so. So I think silver is where to be. And I do think we win. I do think we get back to some form of gold and silver standard. I am a God-fearing man, and I think this is a spiritual battle, and I just think that's where we're headed. So yeah, I'll just leave it there.
All right. Great last note to end on. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming together. I know you guys haven't been together on a roundtable before. I appreciate you doing that. I'm kind of a crazy scientist. I like to throw things together. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much for coming on the channel, Craig, Stuart, and Chris. We appreciate it. For everybody else, stay tuned to both channels, Freedom Report and Live from the Vaults. We continue to do content across both channels. Our goal here is to unite the precious metals community, unite it legislatively, educationally, along with other freedom fighters in crypto or whatever space wants to come together so that we can form the sound money initiative and let our legislators and let the banks know what we want so that we have a voice. It's important that we have a voice. So we're trying to build this voice up in a lot of different ways to protect the people and to provide options for people. So we appreciate you guys sticking by with us and supporting us through all of that. You're the reason why we do it. So thank you to the viewers. And until next time, this has been Rob Kientz with the Freedom Report and the Kinesis Live from the Vault channel.